On a football Monday, a lot to unpack from the weekend and a lot to discuss when it comes to this Arizona Cardinals football team picking up a win 28-27, a game-winning field goal to push them in front of the Miami Dolphins to push them into first place. And because of tiebreakers, they control first place in the NFC West in a division that, let's be honest, is not meeting the expectations that certain teams had on them before the year. The 49ers in particular are off to a very, very slow start. And I don't know if you can just call it a slow start at this point because we're basically at the halfway point of the season. So a just tough go altogether for the teams in the NFC West, but no need to feel bad for any of them because the Cardinals are in first place. They have earned their spot there with the way that they've played over the last couple of weeks. And we just spent the last segment talking about how great of the last 2 weeks were for the Cardinals in comparison to other teams in the NFL, and how I don't know if there's a team that's had a better 2-week stretch than this team's had the last 2 weeks to salvage their season and to put themselves in this position at this stage. And we talk about how they won 2 games in 2 different ways. Well, let's discuss the second game a little bit more because something happened in that game that all of us have been waiting for, that all of us have said would be the missing piece, would be the key to unpacking this entire operation offensively. And that was, how can the Arizona Cardinals get to a place where their offense gets both Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison Jr. involved? When do they get to a spot where their star tight end, because he is a star, Trey McBride is a top 5 tight end in the NFL right now, and their star first-round pick wide receiver? No one is questioning the talent of Marvin Harrison Jr. here in the early going. The execution, not great. The inconsistency, not great, but not all on him. The scheme hasn't helped at times. There has been a lack of flow to the offense. And again, we talked about how this model, the way that they won this game, scoring 28 points, is what we thought this team would be able to do. And it involved a lot of Marvin Harrison Jr. So to me, it is not a surprise that they win this game when the stat sheet shows 9 for 124 for Trey McBride on 11 targets, and Marvin Harrison Jr., 6 for 111 and a touchdown on 7 targets. And I think on any given week, you could interchange those target numbers, 11 for McBride, 7 for Harrison. You could flip those. But this offense is going to function at its best. It is going to look like the ideal version of itself, and it is going to look like a good offense that can win football games when that happens. When Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison Jr. are the top 2 on this team in targets, and they're doing stuff with that volume. That's what this team needs to do. Now, they don't need to both go for 100 every single week. That's probably asking a little too much. But that is the recipe for consistency and long-term success. Because let's just look at the Charger game real quick. The top 2 targets in that game were Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison Jr., but 5 for 51 for Trey McBride, 3 for 21 for Marvin Harrison Jr. So again, another game where they were the top 2 target getters on the offense. You go back to the Packers game and you look at the target share. Trey McBride, your top guy with 8 targets. Your next guy was DeMarcado with 7. Marvin Harrison Jr. left the game with the concussion there, but only 2 targets. They lose the football game. So you're starting to see a trend here as we keep going back into this cycle. Let's go to their win over the 49ers, and let's see if it looks very similar. We'll see if we'll find the statistical outlier here. The top 2 guys in targets on the team, Trey McBride with 9, Marvin Harrison Jr. with 7. Nobody went over 100. McBride was 6 for 53. Marvin Harrison Jr. was 2 for 36. But again, the top 2 guys in targets on the Cardinals offense, Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison Jr. In all 3 of their wins, that's been the case. Let's go back to the Rams game where they won 41-10. I guarantee you that that's what it looks like because we know what Marvin Harrison did in that game. 4 for 130 and 2 touchdowns. He led the team with 8 targets. Trey McBride, 6 catches on 6 targets for 67 yards. Those are your top 2 target getters. So in all 4 of the Cardinals' wins this year, they have done so with Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison Jr. being the top 2 pass catchers on this team in terms of targets. That's what has to happen. You look at the first week of the season. Trey McBride and Greg Dortch against the Buffalo Bills. A loss. Again, you're seeing a theme here. Go to the Lions game as I scroll through box scores to prove this point. The top 2 target getters in that game. Marvin Harrison Jr. with 11, Michael Wilson with 9. McBride did get 6 in that game, so it wasn't like he got 0, but a loss, and those two guys were not the top 2 target getters. You look at the Washington Commanders loss. Michael Wilson, the top target getter in that game. Marvin Harrison Jr., 6 targets in that game. So the Arizona Cardinals have lost every single game they've played this year in which Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison Jr. aren't number 1 and number 2 in some fashion in targets. Their 4 wins this year have seen Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride number 1 and number 2 in targets. Do you understand what this team needs to do on Sundays or Thursdays or Mondays or Fridays or Saturdays whenever they play these games? What they need to do in order to win football games. Get Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison Jr. involved early and often, and away you go. That is their recipe. That is the missing puzzle piece. It is the thing that they have needed to unlock. Find the consistency of getting those two guys involved. They did it in 2 straight weeks, and they win 2 straight games. Now, it's pretty self-explanatory. Throw it to your really good players more often than not, and you'll do good things. But the data shows us that when they try to get other guys involved, or when one of the guys is getting covered in a certain way, or can't get into rhythm early, it all falls apart. It all becomes a disaster. And so the blueprint has been given on a silver platter to opposing defenses, but to this Cardinals offense. You know that you are going to have the most success when you can scheme those two guys early and often. Scheme those guys open, get them quick catches to get them in the flow of the game, and constantly find a way to feed both of them. Because if those two guys are on, and those two guys are in the flow of the offense, and your play calling is a reflection of those guys being in flow, I don't know what defenses are supposed to do with Trey McBride being your over-the-middle guy, and Marvin Harrison Jr., your game-changing player that can go for a deep ball down the field, but could also catch a ball in space and run. So when you have those two elements to your offense, your passing attack becomes potent. It gets to a place where 28 points plus is reasonably on the table every week. You get to a place where you can rattle off a couple wins in a row. You get to a place where you can be first place in your division. And so I think the biggest example so far, because in all 4 of their wins, it has been the case. But this game against the Dolphins was the biggest example of, you want to win? Trey McBride, Marvin Harrison Jr. have to lead this team in targets. You have to almost force them the ball. You have to draw up on that play sheet that looks like the Waffle House menu. Get yourself a section that is Trey McBride plays. Get yourself a section that is Marvin Harrison Jr. plays. And go to those when you feel like those guys aren't in rhythm. All right, Marvin Harrison Jr., Maserati Marv's doing well early. I got to get Trey involved. Well, okay, let's go to the menu. All right, I got these 3 plays for Trey. Now, game script, game flow is going to dictate this, and I get that. But there is a recipe for success here. It has been given to us, and we have seen it in action over the first 8 weeks of the season. It has been a true constant. When those two guys are getting the majority of the targets of this offense, they are producing and they are winning. And so it's just about finding the consistency. It would be much more difficult for this team to find success if they didn't know what the blueprint or the recipe was. But the blueprint and recipe has been handed to them. It has been shown to them. They have seen it with their own eyes. So now it's just about finding the consistency to have more games like yesterday and less games like week 1 against Buffalo, week 3 and week 4 against Detroit and Washington. And the other thing about yesterday's game, too, is the fourth quarter comeback of being down 2 scores in the fourth quarter and Kyler Murray rallying the troops and Kyler Murray making plays. Goes back to our conversation about buy-in a little bit earlier in the show. Because you have that buy-in from your team, they believe. They believe they belong on the field with the Miami Dolphins. They believe that no lead is insurmountable. They don't believe that the game is over until the clock hits zeros. And that belief is contagious, especially when the results follow. And now the Cardinals have set themselves up with what they've done the last 2 weeks to really show that they are ready to take the next step as an organization under this leadership. They don't have to hope for other stuff to happen. It's in their hands. What happens the rest of this season for this team is all going to be up to them. We don't have to scoreboard watch. They're in first place. They're 2-0 in the division already. Everything that's going to happen the rest of the way is all up to them. You know what the blueprint is to get your offense in flow. We've talked a lot today about your opportunity now on defense to go out and get an impactful player with the pass rush market being set with Josh Uche going from the Patriots to the Chiefs for a 6th-round pick. The market has been set. Don't be the team that is left out, that is left without a dance partner. And I'm scrolling through Twitter to make sure a trade hasn't happened. And then go out and continue to play winning football the way you've played it the last 2 weeks. Because at the end of the day, that's what the Cardinals have done. The Chiefs are 7-0, and the Chiefs are 7-0 because they're playing winning football. They're not perfect. They're making mistakes, but they're playing winning football. They are finding ways to win. Now, I'm not comparing the two teams, but the last 2 weeks, the Cardinals are finding ways to win. And when you start finding ways to win, boy, does that change how a locker room feels. That changes the confidence level. It gets you way more amped up to play. This game against the Bears on Sunday for the Cardinals, they're going to be amped up to play Chicago. They're going to be amped up to play that game. Then if they win that one, welcoming in the lowly Jets, they are going to be excited to play that football game. So it seems as though the blueprint is there. They have to go out there and follow the blueprint and get the ball in the hands of their talented players. But it was nice to see. You look down at the box score and you see 100-plus receiving yards for both of those guys. You're not surprised that the Cardinals were able to win the football game. More of it, please.